We may actually get through 2 commandments today. Who knows?
Not get carried away.
Mhm.
Goals.
So
Goals.
we are in Exodus 20 one more time, at least, probably 2 or 3 more times. But we will look at the 8th commandment, verse 15. You shall not steal. What do you think about that? Don't do it.
He that stealeth, steal no more.
But let him work that he may
Prosper.
I'm so confused.
look that one up for your mom, PD. That's a good verse to quote.
I can paraphrase, I think it should give to others.
Yes, so that you can be a blessing to others. And that's one of the ways in which Jesus takes us a lot farther than maybe we have encouraged our children to go. You know, we don't want them to steal. We tell them if you want something, work for it. And that's not a bad philosophy. But Jesus goes on beyond that and says, through his servant Paul, to be a blessing to others. We work not just to make money for ourselves, but to help others.
Ephesians 4:28. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need.
I suspect that every small child picks up milk off the counter and walks out with it. And when the folks found out, they needed to go back and pay for it. And that was a powerful lesson, let me tell you.
With a sore rear end, hopefully, too, huh? Yeah. With a sore rear end, they had to go back in there and pay.
No, I don't get a sore rear end, but I sure learned a lesson.
Okay.
I sure learned a lesson. And probably that's the last time I ever did that. That was rather
Embarrassing.
It was hard. Yes, that's all I can say. I was very, to go back in and tell them they had done that. But it was hard on my side. But it taught me a very valuable lesson.
My mom tells the story on my older brother that when he was about, I guess, 3 or 4, he went next door and took a bunch of the lady's flowers out of her garden and brought them over to give them to mom, as a present to his mom. Now that's really hard to get mad at, and there's no paying. First of all, you can't pay her for the flowers she grew herself, and he wasn't stealing them for himself. He was stealing them for mom. So what do you do there?
Let him know that he wants to at least come to the neighbor to see if he wants to ask. Well, it's dangerous. That's what we did. Yeah. Wow. That was a favorite flower.
It's interesting that the commentary in this particular Bible doesn't even have anything. Most of the other ones, evidently, looking here, not all of them, but this one doesn't say anything. No follow up to that at all.
Figured it pretty well self-explanatory.
It's not a practice that is expressly condoned, by any other culture. Probably no culture goes around saying you can just take whatever you want if it belongs to someone else. But it is one that kind of in our current context is kind of being questioned and rethought about whether or not the concept of private property even really exists, whether anything is actually yours. And it's one of those things that I think sometimes perhaps the stated goal is noble in that you're giving to people that need by taking from those who have more than they need. But when you force others to give, you rob them of the opportunity really to choose. You don't really relieve them of their obligation, and you're not really giving anything yourself, are you? So it's not like you're generous if you're generous with other people's money. And even if you're helping someone else out, even if you're taking someone's flowers to give to your mother, I mean, those aren't your flowers to do that with. It's, I think, a pretty immature and probably really disingenuous line of reasoning. You know, we talked a little bit last time I was here about the idea of adultery as a property crime. And that presupposes the view that female sexuality is the property of either the father of the unmarried woman or the husband of the married woman. And that's kind of really just an unpleasant way of looking at it by our standards and our culture and everything, to think about something as personal as sexuality being property. You know, that's your body. It's the most private and intimate part of your body. And it's, it's kind of so very personal. Your sexuality is so very personal. So to think of that as being property is really difficult for us. Here, this is about property, but in a culture that saw property to some extent as an extension of your person. And this line, perhaps, between what is you and what is your property, which is kind of clearly delineated to us, it's maybe a little more blurry to them. It's not exactly the same thing, but it is not completely dissimilar. I have in the handout notes that it's thought by some that this is really more a commandment to prohibit kidnapping than what we would call theft. So this would address directly what Joseph's brothers do to him. They steal him from his father and sell him to some traders, and he ends up in Egypt. That is, of course, deprivation of a person, isn't it? I mean, it's very they deprived him of his liberty. He can't go where he wants to go. He can't go and do what his father has called upon him to do. So I think when we see it that way, maybe it's a little more akin to the preceding commandment. Do not commit adultery. Do not take someone's liberty. But their property is also their person. There's this blending of the two. When you take their person or whether you take their property, you are depriving them of their liberty because that's their property to do with what they want. And I think there is very much a biblical concept of ownership of material things, that we have things. There is also the teaching of Christ to be willing to lay down whatever we have, including our persons. But certainly then, if we're called to lay down our very lives for the cause of Christ, we should be understand that to be laying down our property as well, shouldn't we? Our willingness, if you will die for something, you will certainly pay a little something for something, won't you? In fact, that's if that's all the same, that's how we'd rather handle it, right? Just keep this on a material standpoint. But I think this shows how seriously the commandment is held. If it's linked to something like adultery, and by committing adultery, you are stealing from someone, then stealing from someone is really going at their very innermost being in a way. It's taking from who they really are. And that's why in some of these ancient cultures, the penalty for stealing was so severe. 150 years ago around here, you stole somebody's horse, you got strung up for it, right? You steal a candy cane from the general store on your way out, you might just get swatted on the rump and told to go back in there and pay for it. But I'm not going to ask Mark what it was like around here 150 years ago, but I think that's probably a distant memory for him, so I'm not going to try to bring that up. But it's but it's that's these cultures. Even today, a lot of them they will punish very severely things that we slap people on the wrist for, or maybe don't even punish at all. Maybe even reward and incentivize them to do. There's a young lady in prison in Russia right now who's an American citizen who was in Russia to play professional sport, had some illegal substance on her person or in her baggage. I'm not sure what was going on there. And it's something that maybe, first of all, maybe where she's at in America, it might not even be illegal. It might have been perfectly fine. Second of all, even if it was illegal, what she had, the amount on it would have been nothing. Absolutely, really nothing. Maybe a fine at worst, and probably ultimately nothing. Instead, she's looking at 9 years in hard labor in prison. And it just got upheld by their appeals court, I think yesterday or maybe the day before. So I have a hard time imagining she's actually going to be over there for 9 more years. But it became kind of a big cause among the celebrated people. And, every time I was just thinking when the story was breaking originally, I was like, every time you make a bigger deal out of this in the media, you are making it harder for her to get out. You are driving the cost of her freedom through the roof. And maybe that's what you want to do. I don't know. But one of the prisoner exchange things they were talking about was some big arms dealer, illegal arms dealer, someone who's responsible for the death probably of hundreds, if not thousands of people, for someone with a really small amount of what is now in America, for the most part, a legal substance. So now, I don't know what everybody's agenda was with all that. I think that the penalty does not fit the crime whatsoever. I think that is absolutely ludicrous that she would have to face that kind of penalty for what she did. At the same time, I'm not a member of the Russian government. Some of y'all may think I am, but I'm not. My contacts with Russia are dated and not that strong to begin with. So it is this idea of crime, property, possession, and then your personage being blended is not really that difficult in other cultures. We may say things like you can't hurt somebody who's damaging your property. You can't physically harm someone who is only damaging your physical property, but who's not posing any threat to you. But that's our way of looking at it. That's our current context, certainly and we're of course looking at it on this side of the cross too. So that's part of it. Yes, sir.
Well, and to your point, when you are in a different country, you are under their rules and subject to those rules. And no matter what may or may not take place here, if you're in another country, you better be obeying their laws and wherever it is, Mexico or Canada, whether they're a friendly nation or not, if you're in somebody else's jurisdiction,
it behooves you to know the local laws and obey them.
Yeah.
They don't have a lot of incentive to show a lot of mercy to you in a lot of those cultures. You're not a political asset in their view. And in fact, all you are really is a political liability. There's some Central American countries that are popular tourist destinations for Americans. And Americans like to go around wearing a lot of times camouflage, don't they? That's one of our big fashion statements is to wear camouflage. In some of those countries, it's a crime for a private citizen to wear camouflage. I guess they're afraid you're going to go out in the jungle and they won't be able to find you. I don't know what it is, but that it is against the law.
Well, it's like wearing gang colors, obviously we would do that not knowing, but in that country, you're part of the rebels, if you're wearing.
I don't think you'd be mistaken for a Blood or a Crip, PD. I don't think you have to worry about that too much. But yeah, what is illegal is one thing. Certainly the gang members can wear their colors, can't they? But we might say at school, the kids there, you're not allowed to wear what we perceive to be gang colors. So again, it's a property. That's my bandana. That's my shirt or whatever it is. But it is an extension. And I guess this is all I'm really trying to say is that it's an extension of your person. And so to look back at the prior commandment, which seems to diminish the sacredness almost of somebody's person by making it property, that may be our way of looking at it. And I think it is our way. And I don't think it's a bad way to look at it. But I don't think it's necessarily the biblical way. That just because it's property doesn't mean it's not precious. It doesn't mean it's not a matter of life and death. I'm not going to get into too many names or anything because I think I've heard about this case from like 4 or 5 different people in the community where there was a shooting and a fatal shooting about 2.5 miles at most, maybe less than that from our building here. And the circumstances, I guess the defense was self-defense, but it's pretty hard to really see how that person was defending either their person or their property at the time. And it never went to trial. It did not, I don't think. Maybe if you know what I'm talking about, you can tell me whether or not the shooter faced any criminal liability or not. I don't think so. And it's it's hard for us. And I think it's something we should look at the life of even someone who is destroying our property as being more valuable than their life. Or their life is more valuable than our property, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Rick, can I make an observation?
Yes, sir.
When you link the stealing to the adultery, then, well, often we hear people that are violated sexually, that's the comment, I feel so violated.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've also, at least I've heard of folks who have had their homes broken into and stuff stolen when they were gone. They say they feel violated as well. So that, there's a personal aspect to it. And this case that you're referencing kind of fits with that. But, I don't know all the specific details, but not only was that a business, but it was also the man's home. So it is personal.
And when you own that business, it's not just a business, it's your livelihood. It's something maybe you hope to leave to your heirs. So it's like, you see when people rob a store or business now, if it's a big company, if you were going to rob McDonald's, if you went into McDonald's, and I'm not advocating anybody robbing McDonald's, but if you go out robbing McDonald's, the manager has probably been trained. You give them whatever they want and get them out the door. Just let them have don't resist. Do not resist the evil man. If you go in a mom and pop restaurant and mama is behind the cash register and pops back in the kitchen, and you're going to rob their store with the money they're going to pay their bills with and everything for that week or that month, you might encounter a little different response when Pop may have a shotgun back in the kitchen. Mom may have a 38 underneath the register. You might. It's a different way of looking at the enterprise. And as we get more and more impersonal in how we do our business, we see property a little bit differently. So to impose property standards on a person, I mean, this is a culture that has slavery. When we come back to Exodus after our break, we'll get into some of all that stuff. This is a culture that has slavery, and slavery is very much about reducing a human to a piece of property, but that doesn't really mean they stop being a human either. We have the state penitentiary here. It is a dehumanizing environment to be an inmate there. I mean, they are trying to make you conform to some strict guidelines. You lose a lot of your autonomy. You lose a lot of your ability to defend yourself. You have to rely on them to defend you. And it's probably well-deserved. That's the punishment that has come because you may have broken one of these 10 commandments, maybe several of these, or some other laws. But it is still, we think of it as they're still human beings. Even though they maybe have been dehumanized to some extent, we hope that at some point in the process they discover a new level or a new form of being a human being and emerge ready to re-enter society. Of course, that doesn't always happen. In fact, maybe that's the exception rather than the rule. But the idea, and I guess this is really what I'm trying to push back against, is the idea that property and humanity have nothing in common with each other. That whatever you have is not really yours, and it's just it's just what happens to be there. It's really hard to tell that to someone who's fighting with their siblings over their parents' estate after they passed away. How many people have seen big fights in families over probably what was pretty modest inheritance to begin with? So we just kind of know that, and really at the core of it, I think, is this notion or belief that what we have come by legitimately is something God has given us. What we have come by the sweat of our brow, what we have come by through our own labors and our own ministry, or what we have come by just as a free gift from God, is what God intended us to have. So when you take that from me, or I take that from you, I am frustrating the will of God. And I'm also, and I think more importantly, saying to God, I don't trust you. When you steal, you're saying to God, I don't trust you to give me what I need. I don't trust you to give me my daily bread, so I'm going to take some bread from somebody else. So that's why this is one of the big 10. This is why this not stealing, and of course it doesn't go into every different way you can steal from somebody. There are a lot of ways you don't have to just physically take the candy bar off the counter in the general store without paying for it. There's any number of ways you can take from someone, so it's, the better you get at it, they may not even look at it what you did as stealing from them. So, but God is ultimately the judge of that. And if we trust God to give us what we need, we ask and it is given to us. We seek and we find. God knows we need food to eat, clothes to wear, shelter from the elements. And if we trust God and follow his leadership, these things will be added unto us. If we seek first his kingdom, Jesus says, you'll get the kingdom and you'll get all of these other things too. Not that you become a super wealthy person, but that you will be provided for. And you will be, I think, provided for ideally in a way that comports with Paul's teaching, that not only do you have what you need, you have enough to help others who are in need. Any other thoughts on this? It is a pretty straightforward. There are some subtleties there, maybe, in terms of what exactly this entails, but and why it is, if it's such a simple precept, why do we even have to? But when you go through the law of Moses, you'll see some laws and you say, did they really have to have a law about that? You know, sadly, I mean, things that you wouldn't think anybody would ever want to do, somebody wants to do it, and you have to tell them, no, you can't do that. No, don't make jokes about bombs as you're walking on the airplane. That is not a good idea. You know, that's a good way to sit that flight out. You know, so, and many other, maybe forever, maybe that's it. So, there's always one guy that's had a few too many at the airport bar who wants to pretend to be a comedian going onto the plane, but. I didn't have that problem this time. I did have a young man who evidently didn't think bathing was a real necessary thing to do before you went on a flight, but that's I'm glad it was only a 2-hour flight. I mean, it could have been really a lot worse, I guess. Okay, so let's trust in God. Again, a positive corollary to do not steal is give, and it will be given unto you. So, the 9th commandment, we are going to at least start talking about the 2 of them in one time. The 9th commandment is, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What do you think about that?
Well, on the outside, it looks pretty straightforward.
Okay.
And I'm sure there are probably lots of ins and outs to it. To bear false witness against somebody is to tell a lie about somebody, basically, you know, and with the thought of probably getting them into trouble or whatever. You know, under the Jewish law, like they would go before the Sanhedrin or the chief priest or whatever, and if somebody gave false witness again, I mean, it could cost them their life, really.
They tried to do that against Jesus, didn't they, in the court, and they couldn't. They couldn't get their story straight to accomplish their goal, but they were, and that's what was at stake. So all of these laws, you look at as we get into sometimes the law, the penalty for it was something like you will pay back 10 times or you will pay back 4 times or whatever, and sometimes it was your life.
Yeah.
They didn't really have jails. You know, there really wasn't incarceration. You're going to go locked up for 10 years. You know, that wasn't really the penalty. So all of these commandments, it really is a matter potentially of life and death. So it's very serious. And in any culture that has it's advanced enough to have a judicial system, and maybe too advanced to have a judicial system like ours, you want that to be reliable. And it has to be something that can be reliable for everyone in order for it to be effective. If it depends on who has the most money, and Lord knows that in our judicial system, it sure helps to have a lot of money, doesn't it, when you go into it? There's no doubt about it. Hopefully, though, Lady Justice is truly blindfolded. And she doesn't know how much you have and doesn't look at you and see how nice your clothes are and all these other things when in court. But this bear false witness isn't necessarily just telling a lie. It is to try to gain an advantage on someone, probably in a courtroom type situation, in a case where you are in the judicial system, whatever the court has, whatever the country, the culture has. Again, in the ancient cultures and even in ours, a lot of times it comes down to a matter of life and death. It becomes really a call for authentic honesty through and through. And that's what Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount when he talks about letting your yes be yes and your no be no. You have heard it said, but I say to you. And his critique of the cultural practice where they would find a way to craft an oath that induced confidence, but that actually meant nothing. And they got really good at that. And that's pretty common in some of those ancient cultures in that region of the world. They don't want to steal, but it's not stealing to them if they make you believe something that's not true and you give it to them. And we've kind of refined that and say, well, yeah, that's what we call fraud, So that is stealing. And I think that's true. That is stealing. But it is, again, begins at this one point, which is let the judicial system be reliable and fair and just for everyone, regardless of their wealth, which I think is probably and always has been an unattainable goal. It's never going to be fair. The people with more money and more power are always going to get a fairer shake from the judicial system than people who don't have much. And that's just the reality of it, because we have human judges, we have human beings looking at it.
Well, and in our judicial system, the more money you're able to pay, there are lawyers that can command more money or are worth more money supposedly because of their education, experience, or whatever like that. And so if you've got the more money to spend, you're going to, in all likelihood, get a better lawyer than the public defender who's just getting started and trying to figure this whole situation out and not as talented with his tongue yet or as knowledgeable as,
Or spread thinner. He's got a bunch of other
yeah.
all of equally guilty clients, and they're not one that can command his attention and all of that. So there's a certain amount of creativity to lawyering, that's for sure. And the less busy you are, the more creative you can be. But this bearing false witness, again, these things are consistent in that they regard someone's well-being, someone's status, someone's wealth, someone's property as being very much about who they are as a person. So these are all, we kind of see adultery as a personal matter, and then we shift into some property things, stealing and bearing false witness. But I just don't think the Bible draws such a clear line between person and property.
Well, this bearing false witness, you could take away my reputation, which may be all I have is my reputation.
Particularly in an honor culture like the ancient Jewish culture was. It was all about honor. You save face at all terms, and you try to get honor sometimes from someone else. And so if the negative commandment is you shall not lie, the positive corollary would be to tell the truth and let your yes be yes and your no be no, and become someone just kind of known to be honest, brutally honest. And I'm not talking about telling your wife if you like her hair or not sometimes, that type of thing. I'm not talking about, sometimes we have to be polite and, someone gives you some pumpkin soup or something and you don't like pumpkin and you tell them it's delicious. You don't like it because you just don't like pumpkin, something like that. I mean, there's a being polite, being congenial and all that, but there's also being known for being of impeccable honesty, that you absolutely tell the truth. And when you do that, it's easier to remember, isn't it? For one thing. And that's kind of what we see with Jesus. When they start trying to lie about him, they can't put the case together. Even in a corrupt court system, even in an illegal trial, even they are bound to some extent. Even while they're breaking the Mosaic law, they're still kind of bound by it. They can't just go kill him. They have to have 2 or 3 witnesses hear him or see him do something that warrants death under the law. So these legal protections, these are very important. They were very important to the culture, and you have to have poor people, especially, have to have some sense that they can go to the justice system and get exactly that. There's a recent notion that the idea, the contrast between law and order and justice. That wealthy people want law and order so they can enjoy their wealth, and that poor people seek justice. Sometimes the implementation of justice does not keep the order, does it? It upsets a lot of apple carts. So this is really a notion of justice, more so than law and order. This isn't so much about keeping things the way they are, maintaining the status quo. This is about protecting the vulnerable. And when you implement justice, a lot of times it really does. The people who are powerful suffer as a result of it. They lose money, they lose power, they lose status. Because they're supposed to, under whatever those circumstances are. But these aren't exactly the foundation of Jewish culture, but they are the guideposts. They are the protections of Jewish culture under the Mosaic Law. The foundation was the Exodus. I mean, they became a nation when they passed through the Red Sea, baptized into Moses. They are now a new nation of Jewish people. So they're not really built on these commandments, but they need to abide by these commandments if they want to endure as a people, to continue and prosper potentially as a people. Departing from these things, their society will descend into chaos. It will be even more the powerful taking from the weak. And that God's idea of justice is to protect the weak. The strong can usually take care of themselves. So God is more interested in protecting the weak than he is simply maintaining law and order. He's wanting to have a just society so that 2 women fighting over the only surviving baby from the night before can go before the king of Israel, who's supposed to be so wise, and have him decide their custody case. If he's so wise, why didn't he just say, well, we're going to have a DNA test? We'll find out that way. Only a man would say, well, cut the baby in half. That would be only a woman would never say that.
It was effective.
It worked. Yeah. So that's one of those tales. It's hard to imagine either woman would say, okay, doesn't do me either one of them any good if the baby guy dies. But that's one of those stories that makes a point, and try not to take it too far, I think. But okay, we will look at the 10th commandment next week, Lord willing, and maybe get into finishing up the text of Exodus chapter 20. And if not, we'll do that the next week. And after that, we will take a break from Exodus. I know we've been in it a long time. And once you get into the laws, it's more laborious study to go through looking at laws and all that. It's a lot more fun to study stories, look at narrative. But these are not narratives. These are commandments. And we'll look at some of them. We probably won't go through every single law. We will look at kind of some of the highlights or some of the ones that maybe we have commonly misunderstood or misapplied, and kind of reimagine them. Maybe ones that we can't imagine that the Bible says something like that. That comes up too, but it does. So we'll look at it. Okay. Thank you for your attention and your comments. Nobody popped in and said hi, so I didn't miss anyone there. Mr. Nat King Cole, will you lead us in a closing prayer, please?